He had the world at his feet, but when his wife went into labor, he chose someone else. No amount of wealth can hide the kind of truth that breaks a woman's heart, and no title, no empire, can shield a man from the consequences of turning away when it matters most. Damien Whitmore was a man born into privilege, sculpted by old money and polished to perfection by generations of power. The world saw him as untouchable, heir to the vast Whitmore estate, speaker at summits, the man whose name opened doors across continents. But the night his wife, Elena, went into labor with their first child, he told her he was too busy to drive her to the hospital. An hour later, he was gone, rushing not to her side, but to his mistress's apartment across the city, answering a different kind of call. That decision would tear open the perfect life he'd spent decades curating. The Whitmores were old money, the kind of wealth that didn't shout, only whispered through marble halls and century-old family crests. Their estate, Eastmere Hall, sat high above Langford Hills, surrounded by formal gardens and whispering trees. On the outside, it was timeless, untouched. On the inside, it was cold. Damien had been raised to believe his name meant more than character, that charm could replace compassion, and that legacy was built on control, not love. His father, Charles, was the kind of man who didn't speak, only judged. His mother, Vivian, smiled at galas and made enemies disappear behind closed doors. Damien grew up learning to win, and he did. By 25, he wasn't just inheriting the family fortune, he was multiplying it. His business moves were bold and brilliant. He knew how to dazzle a room and how to shut one down. His life was a blur of private jets, world leaders, and whispered admiration. But behind the prestige, he was a man shaped more by pressure than peace. That was when Isabelle Duval entered his world. An interior architect with soul in her sketches, she didn't care about his reputation. She cared about space, light, and meaning. Damien hired her to redesign Eastmere Hall, thinking he'd get a fresh look for an old house. Instead, he got a mirror. Someone who saw past the stone and steel. She brought warmth into the house, into him. He didn't plan on falling, but the heart doesn't take business meetings. And while his wife Elena prepared for motherhood, Damien was slipping away into a secret life that would unravel everything. You see, it wasn't the wealth that broke them. It was the moment he chose not to show up. Not for her. Not for their child. But for someone else. What began as a professional arrangement slowly shifted, becoming something far more personal. Neither of them had expected it, but chemistry has a way of ignoring boundaries. To the outside world, Elena Ward seemed like the perfect partner for someone like Damien Whitmore. She was elegant, composed, and impossibly refined. Though she came from a modest upbringing, she carried herself with the kind of quiet strength that couldn't be bought. She wasn't someone looking to marry into wealth. Before she met Damien, Elena had already built a name of her own. Her boutique design firm, Ward & Co., had attracted a steady stream of elite clients drawn to her ability to turn spaces into something soulful. Their courtship could have been lifted from the pages of a luxury magazine, afternoon walks in Montmartre, weekends sailing across the Mediterranean, candlelit dinners in hidden Manhattan restaurants with no nameplates and Michelin stars. The press called them a power couple, and when they married, they did so under a canopy of fairy lights in the rose garden of Eastmere Hall, before a sea of designers, diplomats, and social royalty. Everything sparkled. But behind the shimmer, small cracks had already begun to form. Marriage, as it turned out, was not a fairy tale. Elena was stepping into a world where appearances came first, emotions came second, if at all. Damien, for all his brilliance, had grown up in a home where love was quiet and conditional, where silence was favored over discussion, and where tension was managed with distractions, not conversation. When things grew difficult, Damien disappeared into his office, or his calendar, or a new venture. Work was always waiting, and always welcome. Elena had come from something different. Her parents, Linda and Gerald, had raised her in a home where voices were heard, feelings named, and problems talked through, not swept under Persian rugs. So in the early days, when arguments arose about schedules, events, or priorities, Elena often chose grace over friction. She made room. She waited. She believed things would settle. Because love, she thought, was stronger than misalignment. Love could grow into understanding. But love, left one-sided, begins to shrink. She began to notice how often Damien's meetings ran late, how many impromptu galas appeared on his calendar, how often he left for last-minute investor gatherings that didn't include her. He'd mention new names, foreign partners, new deals, but his phone buzzed more at night now, and when it did, he left the room. She never accused him. She didn't want confrontation. She wanted truth. More than that, she wanted trust. Some nights, Elena sat alone in their grand living room, her reflection in the gilded mirrors almost unrecognizable. The velvet sofas, the priceless art, it all felt hollow without companionship. Midnights came. Damien returned. Sometimes he smelled of perfume that wasn't hers. When she asked, he'd laugh lightly. "It's a crowded event, Elena. Everyone's wearing something." She smiled, but her heart tightened. She chose not to believe rumors. She chose to wait for clarity. But sometimes, dignity is the loneliest decision a woman can make. Elena could feel it, the weight of judgment pressing down on her, not with raised voices, but with carefully chosen words wrapped in cold smiles. Vivienne Whitmore, Damien's mother, was a woman of sharp posture and sharper opinions. To her, the men of the Whitmore line were infallible, untouchable. And any woman who married into the family had only one job: maintain the legacy flawlessly. Elena's dresses were always slightly off, her speech a touch too casual, her inability to conceive immediately, an unspoken failure she was reminded of with every forced compliment and lingering glance. The criticisms were subtle, but they carved deep. Still, Elena endured them with grace. She smiled through the sting. She said nothing. What Vivienne didn't know, what even Damien didn't seem to understand, was that Elena longed for a child. She just didn't want to bring one into a marriage where distance was already growing in the spaces between their words. And yet, she hoped. She believed that maybe, just maybe, a child could soften the edges of Damien's detachment, that it might teach him tenderness, that it could bring them closer, if not as lovers, then at least as partners in something greater than themselves. Then came the moment she hadn't expected, but had quietly wished for. Between formal dinners and hushed silences in Eastmere Hall's endless corridors, Elena felt a change, subtle at first, then undeniable. She booked a private appointment at a discreet Manhattan clinic. The physician, Dr. Gabriel Weiss, was kind and attentive. He recognized her name before she introduced herself. In quiet tones, he confirmed the news: she was pregnant. He offered congratulations, a soft smile, and a list of health guidelines: nutrition, rest, emotional wellness. But Elena barely heard them. She left the clinic clutching the first ultrasound image in her hand, heart thudding with a mix of joy and uncertainty. Back at Eastmere, the mansion was still and echoing. She texted Damien, "I have something important to tell you. Please come home soon." No reply. She paced the marble floors, imagining his reaction. Would he smile? Would he pull her close? Would he for once put the world on hold for them? He returned just before dawn, his tie loosened, the scent of cologne and champagne still faint on his skin. Too tired to talk, he mumbled and slipped into bed. Elena waited. Morning light crept through the curtains as she placed the ultrasound photo on the breakfast table. Her hands trembled. "Damien," she whispered, voice fragile but determined, "we're going to have a baby." He stared at the image. For a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe awe. But just as quickly, it vanished. The walls went back up. "A baby," he repeated flatly. "Yes." She reached for his hand. He pulled slightly away, cleared his throat. "That's big news. Are you feeling okay?" The words landed like glass on tile, empty, cold. Elena nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. He kissed her forehead mechanically and excused himself. "I just need some time to process," he said before disappearing into his office. She sat alone at the table, staring at the tiny image of new life, telling herself he was just overwhelmed, that he'd come around, that this was temporary. But days passed, and Damien remained distant. He filled his hours with back-to-back meetings, investor calls, travel plans. The mention of the baby came only as an afterthought, overshadowed by revenue forecasts and quarterly strategies. Elena began to wonder, had she brought this child into a house already built on silence? While Damien lost himself in brand deals and property expansions, Elena found herself sinking into a quiet despair. The more her belly grew, the more alone she felt. Morning sickness came in relentless waves. Mood swings arrived without warning, emotions she tried to hide from the house staff, even as her body carried new life and her mind held growing doubt. She poured her energy into the nursery. Color swatches, soft fabrics, the scent of fresh paint, these became her comfort. She browsed cribs and rocking chairs, imagining bedtime stories, soft lullabies. Damien barely noticed. He never asked about the baby's name or how she was feeling or what she needed. And though Elena tried to brush it off, tried to believe he was simply busy, her heart had already begun to ache with questions. Then one day, a quiet voice pierced the silence. Alma, the elderly maid who had served the Whitmore family for decades, paused as she was clearing a hallway table. She looked at Elena with eyes full of sympathy. "Be careful, Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly. "There's something you should know." Elena's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Alma hesitated, her fingers tightening around the silver tray. "I've seen him," she whispered, "leaving the house late, with a woman, not once." The words hit harder than Elena expected. She had wondered, yes, the phone calls, the perfume, the way Damien disappeared with vague explanations and never invited her along. And then there was that name, Isabelle Duval. She remembered seeing it once on his phone, a message that had appeared when he left it on the nightstand. She had told herself it was business, just another associate. But now the name echoed with new weight. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. Instead, she waited. One evening, under the pretense of needing help with nursery finances, she walked into Damien's office. He was in the shower. His phone sat on the desk, screen still lit. Her hands trembled. "You don't want to know," a voice whispered, but she already did. She picked up the phone. First came harmless emails, hotels, construction plans, investment proposals. Then, something else, an encrypted app, a message thread. "Isabelle, I miss you. Can we meet?" "Damien, tomorrow night, Hotel Royale, same suite." The screen blurred. Elena nearly dropped the phone. Her legs felt weak. Her lungs refused to fill. The betrayal wasn't a theory anymore. It was right there, written in unfiltered words. She placed the phone back exactly where she found it, locked the screen, and walked out. That night, she lay in bed beside a man she no longer recognized, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Rage pulsed through her, yes, but it was heartbreak that sat deepest. Not just for herself, for her child, for the family she thought they were building. She said nothing. Not yet. The fear that a confrontation might spark more damage, emotional, physical, was too great. The next morning, Elena painted on a smile. At breakfast, she sat across from Damien, who barely looked up from his newspaper. His silence now felt almost cruel. Was he thinking of Isabelle Duval? Was he imagining that hotel suite? Elena's hand tightened around her cup. She knew she couldn't remain in this fog forever, but if she was going to confront him, it had to be on her terms, with a plan, with clarity. Damien Whitmore wasn't just a man. He was a force, a name with power behind it. If this turned into a battle, what would he try to take from her? Would he fight for the child he was barely acknowledging now? Could she survive without the fortress of comfort that had become her life? But in moments of clarity, she reminded herself of one quiet truth. She was someone before him, and she could be someone again. There were moments, quiet, fleeting, when Elena reminded herself of who she used to be. Before Damien, before Eastmere Hall. She had built a design firm from the ground up. She had clients who respected her, a vision that turned cold spaces into living, breathing art. And though she had paused her work during the pregnancy, maybe she could find that part of herself again. She had her parents, Linda and Gerald, steady, loving, and ready to catch her if she decided to walk away from it all. But knowing you can leave is different from being ready to leave. And the emotional weight, it was crushing. She had loved Damien, or at least the man he used to be, or pretended to be. The days blurred into weeks. Her body changed, her world shrank. Each visit with Dr. Weiss offered a few moments of peace. His calm voice, his steady hands, he reminded her to breathe, to rest, to protect her emotional state for the baby's sake. She nodded, but inside it felt like she was holding herself together with threadbare hope. Some nights she imagined Damien would come home and finally see her, really see her. That he would admit everything, apologize, and ask to begin again. Other nights she felt nothing at all, just a cold, familiar numbness. Still, she cooked dinner, set the table, lit candles, hoping foolishly for a shared meal. But Damien rarely came home in time, and when he did, it was a distracted, careless, "I already ate." Alma noticed. The aging housekeeper would bring her warm teas, soft encouragement, and quiet concern. "You're too kind, Alma," Elena whispered one night. "Thank you for noticing." Then came a small moment that shattered everything. Elena was sitting in the living room, flipping through design magazines, trying to feel connected to something that still belonged to her, when Damien's phone rang. His personal phone. He was in the study. Out of reflex, she picked it up. Isabelle Duval flashed on the screen. Her breath caught. She didn't answer, just held the phone in her palm as it vibrated again and again, the sound louder than anything else in the house. When Damien appeared, she silently handed it to him. He snatched it from her, eyes narrowing, jaw tight. Without a word, he turned and walked out to take the call in private. That was when Elena stopped pretending. If he wouldn't choose their family, she would choose herself. She wouldn't scream, wouldn't beg, but she would protect the child growing inside her. By now, she was deep into her third trimester, slower, tired. Her back ached constantly. Dr. Weiss had warned her that stress could trigger early labor. She tried to stay calm, focused on the pastel-colored nursery, ran her fingers across the wooden edges of the hand-carved crib. Then came the night it all broke open. The house was quiet. The staff had retired. Damien was somewhere, supposedly at a business dinner. Elena sat alone, reading a parenting book by the dim light of a nearby lamp. And then suddenly, pain, sharp, deep. She gasped, nearly dropping the book. Her breath shortened, her vision swam. Is this real? False labor? What did the doctor say? She couldn't remember. The pain returned, more intense. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed Damien's number. Ring, ring. Finally. Elena, he said, his voice competing with background noise, music, laughter, clinking glasses. I need you, she whispered, nearly sobbing. Something's wrong. I think I'm in labor. There was a pause. Then his voice, measured, distant. Elena, I'm in the middle of something. Did you call the driver? Or an ambulance? Her heart broke clean in two. Did I call the driver? She echoed, stunned. Damien, I'm scared. But the line had already gone quiet. There was a long pause on the line. Elena could hear music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Then Damien's voice returned, clipped and distant. I'll see what I can do. And just like that, the call ended. Elena's heart pounded violently. She dialed Martin, the mansion's longtime driver, hoping, praying, for help. But Martin hesitated. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Damien took the town car earlier tonight, and the second driver's out. Family emergency. Pain sliced through her again, so sharp it nearly dropped her to the floor. She clutched her abdomen, panic rising. Desperately, she flipped through her contacts. A friend in Manhattan answered, her voice alarmed. Elena, you need to call an ambulance. I'll meet you at the hospital. Every minute that followed felt like a year. The contractions came harder now. Her breath hitched in sobs. She hadn't realized she was crying until the salt of her tears touched her lips. She waited at the front entrance, hunched over, arms wrapped around herself, not just from the pain, but from the emptiness. Where was he? Where was the man who had promised to protect her, the father of her child? Her phone rang again. She gasped. Finally, she thought, Damien. But the number was unfamiliar. With trembling fingers, she answered. Mrs. Whitmore? Came a voice. This is Dr. Gabriel Weiss. I'm calling because your husband just arrived at St. Jude's. Elena's breath caught. With another patient. She blinked. What do you mean? He came in with a woman named Isabelle Duval. She's also pregnant, in early labor. He asked me to call you, said maybe you'd want to be here. The doctor's words dissolved into static in her mind. He hadn't come for her, but he had rushed to the hospital with Isabelle Duval, the other woman, who was also carrying his child. It was a betrayal so profound, Elena felt the air leave her lungs. Her knees buckled. She leaned against the wall, gasping, trying to focus on the pain in her body instead of the agony in her heart. Sirens wailed in the distance. Moments later, paramedics surrounded her, lifting her gently onto a stretcher. As the ambulance sped through city streets, Elena lay flat, hand gripping her belly, tears sliding down her cheeks. The pain of labor and the pain of betrayal twisted through her in equal measure. He had chosen, not just where to be, but who to be there for. By the time she arrived at St. Jude's Hospital, Elena was in active labor. Nurses wheeled her into a room as she begged to see Dr. Weiss. He's assisting another patient, one of them said gently. Isabelle Duval. She was just next door. Alina closed her eyes. She didn't want to imagine it, but her mind filled the blanks. Was Damien pacing between rooms, whispering comfort in Isabel's ear, holding her hand while Alina screamed alone? She didn't know. She didn't want to know. But he never came to her. Not once. Her friend Alyssa arrived shortly after, breathless, wide-eyed. She grasped Alina's hand, trying to calm her, whispering reassurance she didn't quite believe herself. The contractions grew worse. Nurses administered an epidural to manage the physical pain. But nothing dulled the heartbreak. Every voice in the hallway felt like a knife. Every passing footstep felt like a question. Was that him? Was he finally coming in? No, he never came. Hours blurred together. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Weiss entered, his face lined with fatigue, but his tones soft and kind. "You're doing well," he said gently, placing a hand on hers. "Just a little longer, Elena. You're almost there." Dr. Weiss opened his mouth to offer encouragement, but was cut off by a nurse leaning in to whisper urgently in his ear. He gave Alina an apologetic nod. "Excuse me," he said, already heading toward the door. She knew where he was going. Back to Isabelle Duval. The burn in Alina's chest was deeper than any contraction. It was betrayal made flesh, acid in her throat, fire in her heart. But she pushed it away, just as she pushed through the next wave of pain. Before the sun rose, the delivery room echoed with the cry of new life. A boy. Her son. The sound cracked something wide open in her, and tears poured freely. Relief, pain, heartbreak, all tangled into one sacred moment. The nurse placed him in her arms. He was impossibly small, his tiny fingers curled against her chest, blinking beneath the hospital lights. He was hers. And in that instant, love surged through her. Fierce, unwavering, and absolute. Whatever chaos his father had caused, this child would know safety. He would know peace. "Is he here?" she asked quietly, holding her son close. The nurse's face softened. She shook her head. "No, I'm sorry." Alyssa leaned in, wrapping her arms around Elena. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. A few hours later, Dr. Weiss returned. "Your baby is healthy," he said gently. "He's in the neonatal ward for routine observation, but he's strong." He paused. Elena Duval also delivered early. A girl. She's stable. Elena's lips trembled. "And Damien?" Another pause. Longer this time. "He left about an hour ago, with Isabel and the baby. She insisted on an early discharge. He seemed very concerned." The final blow. He had left her, his wife, alone. But he had escorted his mistress and their newborn daughter out of the hospital. For 2 days, Alina stayed in her hospital room, healing in silence. Alyssa stayed by her side, feeding the baby, filling out forms, answering nurses' questions when Alina couldn't. No calls came, no messages from Damien. The sorrow hardened, and from that hardened sorrow something new began to rise, something colder, sharper. Resolve. When Alina returned to Eastmere Hall, her son swaddled in her arms, the mansion felt more hollow than ever. The chandeliers shimmered, the marble gleamed, but the walls felt like a tomb. The staff moved cautiously, eyes downcast. Alma was the only one who dared meet Elena's gaze. "He's in the study," Alma whispered, gently reaching for the baby. "Let me help you get settled." Elena nodded, and then she walked. Down the hallway she had once floated through in a wedding gown. Now each step was heavy, echoing like judgment. She pushed open the study door. Damien sat behind his desk, looking up from a stack of papers. Beside him stood Isabelle Duval, holding a newborn wrapped in soft pink. Elena froze. The baby girl's face was unmistakable, a tiny version of Damien's own features. Her stomach turned. Damien stood abruptly, caught off guard. "Elena, you're back," he said, as if she were returning from a business trip. Her fists clenched. Her voice shook, not with weakness, but with rage. "What is this?" she hissed. "I come home, alone after giving birth to our son, and I find you here, with her and your other child, in my home." Isabel shifted, pale and uncomfortable. "Damien said we could stay temporarily," she said quietly. "I didn't know where else to go." Elena laughed, a sound hollow and sharp. "No place else? So this is what you chose?" Damien raised his hands as if to calm her. "Let's be reasonable, Elena. I didn't plan this. Isabel's baby came early. She needed help. You had an ambulance. You were taken care of." The words hung there, stunned and shameful. "You think that's an excuse?" Elena shouted, her voice rising, ricocheting off the polished wood and painted ceilings. "You left me. In labor. To hold her hand. You have no idea," Elena whispered, her voice cracking, "how humiliating this has been. How much it hurt." Tears streamed down her face, mascara smudging as she clutched her newborn daughter. "I'm sorry," she added, "but I love Damien. And he loves me too." She looked to him silently asking for confirmation. Damien said nothing. But silence has a sound all its own. Elena felt her fury boiling over, her pulse pounding in her ears, but beneath the fire there was something quieter, something heavier, a deep, devastating sorrow. "Did you ever love me?" she asked, barely audible. "Or was I just your trophy? Something to display, while your real life happened somewhere else?" Damien swallowed. It's not like that," he murmured. I care about you, Elena, but Isabel and I, what we have is different. It started before you got pregnant. I didn't mean for it to happen." But it had happened. And those words, they were the final thread. The last piece of the illusion, gone. Elena stood there for a long moment, gathering the broken pieces of herself. But instead of crumbling, she found something else. Clarity. Her son was in safe arms, but he would not grow up in this. Not in a house where lies outnumbered truths. Not under the roof of a man who didn't choose them. "I want you to leave," she said finally, voice trembling but firm. "Both of you, get out of Eastmere Hall." Isabel stepped back, tightening her hold on the infant. Damien straightened, indignation creeping into his tone. "This is my estate, Elena. You can't just—" "I can," she snapped, cutting him off. "The deed is in both our names, remember? That little vow we made to share everything? Well, that includes this house. If you don't walk out now, I'll have you removed legally. And trust me, Damien, I have enough proof of your affair to burn you in divorce court." Her eyes locked with his, cold, unflinching, "and I will do it." A flicker of fear passed across his face. He knew she wasn't bluffing. Her father, Gerald Beaumont, was one of the city's most respected attorneys, and Elena had grown up at his side, learning not just grace, but grit. Damien glanced at Isabel, then back at Elena, like a man trying to measure which life would cost him more. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll go, for now." "This isn't over," he added over his shoulder, but Elena didn't flinch. She stepped aside, watching through glassy eyes as they walked out, Isabel holding the baby, Damien trailing behind. The front doors slammed shut with a thunderous finality. A chapter had ended, and something new, something uncertain but entirely hers, had begun. In the days that followed, Elena met with her father's legal team and filed for divorce. The scandal exploded across headlines. Tech tycoon leaves pregnant wife for Mistress. Whitmore legacy in jeopardy amid double pregnancy drama. Some articles painted her as the victim. Others accused her of knowing all along, but she didn't care. The truth was hers, and so was her next step. She named her son James Morgan Beaumont, placing her maiden name firmly on his birth certificate. A quiet rejection of the legacy she no longer wanted to carry. She moved her home office into a sunlit room beside the nursery, reopening Beaumont & Co., her design firm, her vision, reborn, like her. In the stillness of early mornings, she drew strength from the soft weight of her son against her chest, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger like a promise. He was her reason now, her future, her anchor. And she would not fail him. Support came from unexpected places. Women in society whispered quiet words of solidarity. Old friends reached out, admiring her strength. Even a few of Damien's own allies sent subtle messages of quiet respect, because some people may have believed the headlines, but those who knew her? They saw something else. Not a woman broken by betrayal, but one reborn from it. Even within the walls of Eastmere Hall, where loyalty once lay with legacy, the staff quietly shifted their allegiance. Alma remained a steady presence, offering subtle comfort and quiet defiance in how she now served Elena rather than Damien. The estate, grand as ever, belonged fully to Elena, not just legally, but in spirit. She chose to keep it, not out of sentiment, but for James, for his inheritance, his history. Still, there were days when she walked through its echoing halls and wondered if the place itself was cursed by the arrogance of the Whitmore name. Damien, for his part, attempted to maintain a relationship with James, but Elena set firm boundaries, supervised visits only. Nothing unsaid, nothing unclear. The boy's safety and well-being came first. Each time Damien arrived, it was the same performance. Luxury car, impeccable suits, the same old charm, carefully stitched into every word. But Elena saw through it now. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weight in his posture. The cracks were spreading, even if he tried to hold the mirror together. Wordlessly, she knew Isabel's presence hadn't brought him peace, only more demands, more chaos. But Elena didn't pity him. He was lying in the bed he had so meticulously made. One afternoon, Damien asked if he could speak to her alone. She hesitated. The divorce was well underway. She had no patience left for melodrama, but closure perhaps deserved its moment. They met in the sunroom, light streaming in through glass-paneled walls, palms swaying gently beside white linen chairs. Elena held James in her lap, his tiny hands reaching for dust particles dancing in the air. Damien sat across from her, hands clenched. For the first time in a long while, he looked small. "Elena," he began, his voice quieter than she expected. "I know I've done terrible things. I was selfish. I lied. I just needed to say I'm sorry." She studied him. The man who had once been her husband, her partner, now just the father of her child. A stranger wearing a familiar face. "Apologies don't erase anything," she replied calmly. "I know." He looked down. "But you deserve to hear it. I never wanted to hurt you, or James." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I'm moving forward, Damien. I think you should too. You have another child, a family with Isabel now." He winced. "That's not what I thought it would be. She's threatened to take the baby if I don't keep up her lifestyle. It's a mess. I realized too late that what I threw away was real." Elena didn't respond right away. She thought of giving birth alone, of crying in silence while tabloids tore her life apart, of learning to wake, nurse, and work without a partner beside her. A part of her pitied Damien, but a larger part couldn't forgive. "You made your choice," she said, standing slowly. James nestled against her. "Now you have to live with it." Months passed. The divorce was finalized. Despite the headlines, Elena negotiated a strong settlement, one that ensured James's future and hers. She retained Eastmere Hall, though she moved into a smaller Manhattan apartment to focus on her business and motherhood. The estate was now used only for events, or the occasional weekend escape. Meanwhile, Damien's empire began to crack. His investors, once captivated by his charisma, were growing cautious. The scandal had made them wary. Isabel's spending spiraled. She demanded more than he could sustain. Behind the curated smiles and social appearances, his world was slowly unraveling. Then one day, Elena's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She almost declined it, but instinct paused her thumb. She answered. "Hello?" A quiet voice, familiar yet uncertain. "Elena, it's Isabel Duval." Elena froze, her heart knocked hard against her ribs. "Why are you calling me?" There was silence. Then, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help. We're in trouble." The voice on the phone trembled. "Isabel Duval." Elena's grip tightened around the receiver, fury rising in her chest like a flame. How dare she? After everything they had done, after all the lies, the betrayals, this woman had the audacity to call her for help? She nearly hung up, but something in Isabel's voice stopped her. A crack, a kind of desperation that couldn't be faked. "What kind of trouble?" Elena asked, her voice ice. Isabel hesitated, then explained in rushed fragments. Damien had invested in a risky venture that had collapsed. Creditors were circling, lawsuits threatened. The house of cards was toppling fast, and in the middle of it all, a baby. Darcy, their daughter. "I'm scared," Isabel said softly. "Damien won't ask for help, but I don't know what else to do. He's still James's father, Elena. If something happens to him, it affects all of us." Elena closed her eyes. She wanted to scream at Isabel. "Deal with it yourself. You broke my life. Now fix your own." But the mention of James pulled her back. As much as she wished otherwise, Damien was still his father. And if he ended up in prison or financial ruin, the consequences would eventually ripple back to her son. Not emotionally, James was protected from that, but socially, legally, practically. Elena had rebuilt too much to watch her son's world shake again. "Let me think about it," she said coldly. "I'll call you back." She hung up and stood in silence as the weight of the choice pressed down. She made coffee, called her father. Gerald Beaumont sat across from her in her Manhattan apartment as she laid everything out. He listened quietly. "Legally, you owe him nothing," he said, "but morally, well, that's up to you. If you help him, you might protect James from future fallout. If you don't, there could be long-term consequences." Elena nodded slowly. She hated that this was even a question, but she knew what she had to do. She spent the next few days with her legal team, drawing up a short-term rescue plan. She would provide a loan, strictly for business restructuring. The funds would be traceable, legally bound. In return, Damien would sign an amendment to their divorce agreement. No further claims, no expectation of future assistance, and full acknowledgement that this was not a gift, but a transaction in defense of their son's future. When she called Isabel back to explain the terms, she expected pushback, anger, maybe even guilt-tripping. But instead, "Thank you," Isabel whispered. "You're doing more than I deserve." Elena didn't argue, because it was true. They met in Gerald's office a few days later. Damien looked hollow. His shoulders sagged under the weight of mistakes he couldn't undo. Isabel stood beside him, cradling baby Darcy, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Elena kept her tone professional, her expression unreadable. She laid out the documents, explained the stipulations, and waited. Damien barely spoke. When he finally did, it was barely a whisper. "I don't deserve this," he said. "This kindness." Elena didn't blink. "This isn't kindness," she said. "This is protection. For my son. I'm not saving you, Damien. I'm making sure James doesn't have to pay for what you destroyed." He nodded, signed, didn't look her in the eye. The money stabilized his business, barely. He scraped through, avoiding bankruptcy by inches. The tabloids, as they always did, found newer scandals, newer faces. And Elena? She moved on. Her design firm bloomed once more, clients returning in quiet admiration of her resilience. She balanced meetings and motherhood with a grace she never imagined she'd possess. But she had earned it. Every inch of it. In the early mornings, when James curled against her chest and the city hadn't yet woken, she would whisper the same promise to him again and again. "You will grow up in truth, in strength, in love. And you will never wonder if you were chosen." Motherhood wasn't easy, but Elena thrived in it. Each night, she cradled James in her arms, reading him softly into sleep. His tiny laughter, his bright eyes, they reminded her again and again of what truly mattered. Not headlines, not betrayal, not Damien Whitmore. As for Damien and Isabel, whispers traveled through the social grapevine like leaves in the wind. Their relationship had begun in fire and fantasy, but under the weight of financial pressure and the undeniable guilt of how they'd come together, it fractured. A year later, Isabel left, taking Darcy with her. Elena didn't seek details. She only knew what she needed to know. Damien had become a shadow in James's life. He visited now and then, not enough to build anything real, not enough to undo the silence. Elena neither pushed James toward him nor pulled him away. She let her son decide, but she never lied. And she never pretended Damien was more than what he was, a flawed man who once mattered, now only tethered by blood. And still, in some quiet, ironic twist of fate, Elena found peace, not because justice had been served, not because life became perfect, but because she had discovered something deeper than closure, a strength she never knew lived within her. It had been born in the rubble of heartbreak, raised by long nights alone with her infant son, and shaped by a simple, enduring choice. She would not be broken by what broke her. She refused to let that moment, being left in labor, betrayed, humiliated, define her. Instead, she let it refine her. For James, she built a world of consistency, safety, and joy. A world where love meant presence, where honesty wasn't optional, where women were not disposable. She wanted him to grow into a man who didn't just respect women but stood beside them, who kept his promises, who knew that love was a responsibility, not a reward. The years passed quietly. What once had been a palace of heartbreak slowly transformed, room by room, into a sanctuary of strength. Elena remained at Eastmere Hall just long enough to ensure it was properly maintained, eventually converting the estate into an elite venue for galas, exhibitions, and charity events. What had once been a scandalized estate was now a celebrated space for culture, elegance, and healing. With the help of Alyssa, her ever-loyal friend, and Alma, still by her side, Elena ran the estate like a quiet empire. And her design firm, Beaumont & Co., didn't just survive, it soared. Her heartbreak became her muse. Her spaces began to reflect her journey, bold palettes, intricate detail, fearless concepts. Critics called it the art of reinvention. Commissions rolled in from London, Paris, Tokyo. Every success chipped away at the shadow of her past. Every room she designed was a room she had claimed back for herself. Balancing motherhood and global business was never simple. But Elena had found her rhythm. Each dawn, she would wake early to feed James, his little fingers wrapping around hers as he babbled through sleepy grins. She would rock him softly, telling him tales of kingdoms in the sky, of brave little heroes with gentle hearts. Then she'd slide into her day. Video calls, sketches, negotiations, all conducted with the quiet command of a woman who had earned every ounce of her place in the world. Even before James could form full sentences, he knew one truth better than any. He was loved. And that love came not from a perfect parent, but from a present one. When James was old enough to toddle through the hallways of Eastmere, Elena made a decision. It was time to move. The estate, while grand, still carried ghosts. It had served its purpose, given her space to rebuild, to reclaim. But it was never home. She chose a beautiful, sun-filled townhouse in the heart of Manhattan, modest by society standards perhaps, but rich in warmth. A place for new beginnings. There were memories Elena still carried from Eastmere Hall, but not all were worth keeping. She visited the estate occasionally, for charity galas or private events, but it no longer held her. It was no longer home. Her new sanctuary was a sun-washed brownstone tucked into a quiet Manhattan street. It had tall windows, a small, blooming garden, and walls covered with bright paintings and photographs, snapshots of James frozen in moments of joy. First steps, smeared birthday cake, sidewalk chalk masterpieces. This was hers, built not from inheritance, but from healing. Damian Whitmore had long faded into the backdrop of her life. Their divorce granted her full custody, though scheduled visitation rights were allowed. At first, he appeared like clockwork, still clinging to the facade of power, still bringing extravagant gifts, tiny tuxedos, toy cars that cost more than her first apartment, engraved keepsakes he probably hadn't picked out himself. But soon, the visits dwindled. Rumors floated in society circles that Damian's finances were unraveling, that his bad investments and the lingering scandal had left his reputation bruised. Elena didn't celebrate his fall, but she didn't pity him either. She was polite when he showed up, but her boundaries were firm. James's world was stable now, and she intended to keep it that way. She occasionally heard whispers about Isabel, how she had quietly left Damian not long after Darcy turned one. Some said she called the relationship unsustainable, others that she simply gave up. When Elena heard these things, her emotions stirred in complicated ways. There was no triumph in it, just understanding. They had both been entangled in the same man's unraveling. One from within the marriage, one from outside it. But Elena never reached out. She owed Isabel nothing. Only perhaps the silent hope that she too might find her way forward. Elena, for her part, focused on something deeper. She began mentoring women, especially single mothers, trying to break into competitive fields. She understood that uphill climb intimately. Her story, once whispered in gossip columns, became a beacon of resilience. Through her foundation, Beaumont Future and Vision, she offered seed grants, workshops, and mentorships in design, branding, and financial planning. And in return, she found something money could never buy: purpose. Watching a woman's eyes light up with possibility, that satisfaction far outshined any personal vengeance she might have once dreamed of. Life, too, offered Elena small windows of softness. She dated with quiet intention. A curator from Paris who shared her love for sculpture. A venture capitalist from California who respected her boundaries and admired her vision. None turned into lifelong love, but none were regrets. Each one taught her something. About trust, about courage, about choosing herself first. She no longer feared judgment, no longer needed validation. She knew who she was. James flourished in this home of calm routine and unconditional love. By age 4, he was a curious, observant child, bright-eyed and constantly fascinated by the world. He noticed shadows dancing on their living room walls. He asked why buildings curved instead of standing straight. He sketched rooftops in crayon and painted sunsets with reckless joy. Elena saw in him the spark of something artistic, perhaps a part of herself passed on. She encouraged it. She enrolled him in creative play classes. She gave him space to explore, to express, to scribble outside the lines. Their brownstone slowly transformed into a living gallery, walls covered with his tiny masterpieces. Abstract clouds, rainbow towers, lopsided stick figures holding hands. Each one was a reminder that beauty still bloomed, that healing could leave color in its wake, that even after everything, the future could still be magical. Storms had passed through their lives, leaving cracks in walls and hearts alike. But in time, the winds settled. In the gentler moments when James would ask about his father, Elena offered only the truth, tempered with compassion. "Your father loves you," she would say softly, "just in his own way. But he made choices that took him on a different path." She never filled James's young heart with bitterness. She had learned, painfully, that hatred is a weight too heavy to pass on. Instead, she filled his world with hope. Hope that he would grow into a kind man, a grounded one. Hope that he would never mistake silence for strength or neglect for love. And most of all, gratitude. For their little family of two. For the kind of love no betrayal could ever unravel. One golden afternoon in Central Park, Elena sat on a bench as James ran ahead, chasing pigeons in gleeful bursts of laughter. The sun warmed her face. The breeze was kind. She watched him, arms flailing, laughter ringing. And in that moment, she reflected on the woman she had become. No longer the wife who had once begged her husband to come home. No longer the woman abandoned in labor. She was something else now, something whole. She took a slow breath, savoring the moment, not for what it erased, but for what it proved. She had survived. She had rebuilt, and she had done so without revenge, without validation, without needing anyone to applaud. Her peace didn't come from apologies, it came from purpose, and from the unshakable bond between mother and son. The journey had carved itself in tears and tremors, but here in this sunlit moment, Elena understood. This was her real triumph, a life she shaped with her own hands, a child raised in joy, not resentment, a woman no longer defined by who had failed her, but by how she rose. The tale of Damian Whitmore and Elena Beaumont Whitmore is a haunting reminder. Even behind marble gates and luxury names, hearts can break, trust can shatter, and love, if not nurtured, can turn into shadow. But beyond the ruin, there's something stronger: resilience, self-worth, grace. And if Elena's story has taught us anything, it's that healing is never about forgetting the pain. It's about transforming it into strength, into clarity, into a future worth living for. Thank you for walking with us through this unforgettable journey of betrayal, motherhood, and redemption. If this story touched you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel for more heartfelt tales of love, loss, and healing. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never forget your own worth.